actually be in chapter 3, but we need to get some context out of chapter 1 and chapter 2 first. So Daniel chapter 1, we want to remind you of Daniel and the men we know by their Chaldean names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We want to remind you of their elevated position within the government of Babylonia. The Chaldean government at this time would have been solely under the leadership of King Nebuchadnezzar. For the first couple of years of the captivity and the exile of the Hebrew children into Babylonia, it looks as if he co-reigned with his father, but only for a couple of years. And then Nebuchadnezzar is on the throne solely, and he does so for roughly 40 years. In that time, after the exile of some of the Hebrew children, and several came over, of course, Daniel, and then the three that we call Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego by their Chaldean names, they were elevated in the kingdom. Look with me in chapter 1 and verse 17 through 20. As for these four children, okay, the four Hebrew children that we've been talking about, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. But our focus will be on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They had skill in learning and wisdom. Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king communed with them. Now, the king communed with all four of them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. So they were head and shoulders above even his own men. Verse 20, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. So these four, and our chapter 3 obviously focuses on the three, these four total, Nebuchadnezzar saw their wisdom, their knowledge, their understanding 10 times better. It might be a figure of speech, but it really underscores the point that he saw in them something phenomenal. Chapter 2, verse, let's go to verses 48 and 49. And the king made Daniel a great man, and gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Then Daniel requested the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. So Daniel has the more elevated position in the corridors of power within the realm of Nebuchadnezzar's structure. But he requested of the king, and the king granted that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be over the affairs of the province of Babylon. So they're in a lofty position also. Now, part of the backstory to chapter 3 has got to be that they're not liked being Hebrew children elevated to that rank in the Chaldean government. So chapter 3 enters onto the picture, and remember we looked at this. Chapter 3, according to the Reese Chronological Bible and most commentators, they set chapter 3 18 years after the end of chapter 2. So now Nebuchadnezzar is really at the pinnacle of his career. He's in the middle of his 40 years, and the most dominant superpower on the earth at that time. And the 4 Hebrew children have lofty positions within his cabinet. And Nebuchadnezzar has recognized Daniel, certainly. He's recognized Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and has elevated them and said their wisdom 10 times greater than anything I've seen. Well, how quickly he forgets. How quickly Nebuchadnezzar forgets what he said about these 4 men. How quickly he forgets what he has said and observed about their God. And he sets up an image in chapter 3. He sets up an image that is, what was it, 90 feet high, 9 feet wide, plated with gold, most likely plated with gold. An image that when you hear the music, everybody, all language, all nation, everybody should bow and worship. The idea of it was to worship the God that he had built. Worship the image. Well, this would have violated the Hebrew children's sense of right and wrong. They had the Pentateuch. They would have known that God said there are no other gods before me. They would have known that there's only one true and living God. They would have known that there was only one way to worship the true and living God, and that's the way that He has prescribed. And so they would not, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they would not bow. The masses did. The masses came to the dedication. Oh, by the way, while you're at the dedication, every time you hear the music, you got to bow. And the masses did just that. The 4 could have easily, Daniel's not mentioned in this. The 3 could have easily said, yeah, nobody's going to notice it if we just go ahead and bow with everybody else. We're just doing what everybody else does. And they could have reasoned in their mind, you know, God's put us in a place that we can be a liaison between the Chaldean government and the Hebrew people. We can't be a liaison if we're dead. They could have rationally thought about this, human reasoning, and say, you know, we'll fix the latchet on our sandals right then, and it'll look like we're bowing. We're not bowing our hearts. Well, they didn't do that. This passage has been, as I studied it, very convicting to me, because I think on the horizon, you and I and our generation are going to be called to stand. Are we ready, willing, and able to truly stand? These were young men. They would have been probably in their 30s, if that 18-year figure is about correct, in their mid-30s. But they would not bow. So we pick it up. We read the first 7 verses of chapter 3 last week. We pick it up in verse 8. Wherefore at that time, of course, everybody else had bowed before the image. Chapter 3, verse 8. Wherefore at that time, certain Chaldeans, certain ones, they were called out in Daniel's mind. They wanted to make sure the king knew that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't bow. Certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews, and spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever, which is just a common greeting. But then notice they carefully kind of get to his ego a little bit. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, the dulcimer, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth, that he should, your rule, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning, fiery furnace. So they carefully address the king. They remind the king of his edict, like the king needed to be reminded of his edict. They just trying to inflate his ego and make sure these three don't get off without the penalty prescribed. And they accused these three godly men. Verse 12, there were certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, notice this carefully, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. They haven't paid you proper respect. They haven't regarded you. That's, I think, noteworthy as we get into this. These three Jews would not bow. And remember, the penalty for not bowing was that they would be cast into the fire. Verse 13, Nebuchadnezzar in his rage. Now this is the second time that we've seen Neb go into a rage. It's always a dangerous thing to go into a rage. You lose control of your faculties. You go beyond what you would if you're not in a rage. But he went into a rage and fury and commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Did you notice the difference between the king's query to, the question to the three, versus what the accusers said? The accusers said that they regarded not thee. They showed you disrespect. And I believe this. I believe that these three godly men continuously showed Nebuchadnezzar respect. Because a godly man knows how to show others respect. A godly man knows that that's how that God would expect them and would be honored by them, to show those in authority respect. And the king doesn't even ask them about that or mention about being properly regarded. I believe the king knew their character. The king knew they normally deal with me with respect. You guys, you're off base on that. But did you guys really not bow? Is it true that you didn't serve my gods, verse 14, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Is it possible? This, and of course from their side of it, this violates the Word of God. They can't in good conscience bow before this man-made idol. Although, as I said early on, it would have been easy, wouldn't it, to reason your way to stooping down to fix your shoelaces right about that time. Would have been easy to rationalize, I'm of no help to my people dead. I can't be in any place of authority if I'm cooked in a furnace. I can't be of any consolation or serve in any role as a liaison if I'm dead. And what does it really hurt? Nobody would even really notice it if we blend into the crowd. They could have easily, I think, had they not been men of strong conviction, they could have easily rationalized their way through some sort of bow, some sort of acquiescence to the king's command. But they did not, and they would not. So the king in verse 15 gives them another chance. Now, if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, if so, that's good. I like that. But if ye worship not, ye shall be cast in the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God? Remember this phrase as well. Who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? I'm Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. What God is there, even of your gods, that can deliver you out of my hands? He's about to find the answer to that question. This is the last chance. You'll do what I want because I'm the king. Worship or bow. That's your option. And at this point, how many people would be contemplating that decision with great agony? What do I do? It doesn't appear that they have any contemplation about it at all. It doesn't appear that they have any compulsion to bow in the slightest amount. And this is what, and this thought was what was convicting to me as I thought on this. Would I stand just as strong? Oh, I'd like to say yeah, but I don't know. Truth is, none of us know. Probably none of us will ever know, because we'll never probably be in this boat. But who knows? Maybe we will. They were. This happened. These three men stood in front of the most powerful monarch of his day. And he sits upon his throne, looking down at them, and says, "You will bow before my king, or you will burn." Their answer. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter." Some read that to say that they're not careful to answer. They're not even concerned to try. We've made our decision. We're not worried about it. I've always taken it to say, I'm not going to try to carefully parse my answer. I'm not going to try to carefully word something that might kind of make you sort of happy and might kind of make God sort of happy, and try to be real particular about how I get a politician to state some kind of real carefully formulated statement. And that's how I've always taken it. We're not going to be careful about how we answer this. No. We're not going to do it. We're not, verse 16, latter part, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. And as I say, some take it as, we're not worried about answering. We don't answer to you. We answer to God. But their answer was still the same. However you want to slice it up, the answer was no. And verse 17 is one of the most sobering verses in all of your Bible. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. If He wants to deliver us, He can. We have no doubt in His ability. We have no doubt that our God is able. We don't know what He will do. We don't know that He will deliver us. But we know He can. He's already said, "Who's the God that can deliver you out of my hands?" And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, "Our God. Our God can deliver us out of your hands, out of your furnace," either one. And verse 17, if it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And I love this. And He will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. Either way, we're not in your hands. Either way, our lives are not in your hands. He may deliver us from the fire. He can, no question. But what we know is this: He will deliver us out of your hands. If we go into the fire and we burn, we're not in your hands anymore. We're in His. We're in His presence. If He sends an earthquake and the furnace falls into a horrible pit, and there is no furnace to cast us into, and we've been delivered out of the furnace and out of your hands. Our God is able. We don't know what He's going to do. We just know He can. That passage needs to resonate in our hearts. Never doubt the ability of God. Never doubt His ability to heal your loved one. Never doubt His ability to bring you through a circumstance that looks impossible. Never doubt His ability. But pray for His will. I mean, it's not a question of, can He, for example, save my loved one from some disease? Of course He can. I don't know that He will. And He's right and just and good even if He doesn't. And He is right and just and good even if He had allowed them to be cooked to a crackle in the furnace. He is right and just and good even if He allowed that. And He's right and He's just and He's good when He allows our loved ones to be taken by disease or what we call an accident, or whatever. But it's not a lack of ability. And these three men know that. Our God's able to deliver us from your simple little furnace. Our God's able to deliver us out of your hands, and we know He will. There's no complaining, there's no deal making, there's no softening the answer, making it politically correct. No. We will. And even when they say that He will deliver us out of your hands, that proves they see an eternal future. To be delivered out of Nebuchadnezzar's hands is to be delivered out of this realm. Because they were servants of the king. And they were going to be delivered out of this realm one way or another. Through death, through miracle, through whatever direction that the Lord chose to use. They were going to be delivered from His hand. And that shows you their mindset, their viewpoint. They were seeing things eternally. They were seeing things beyond the right now. They were seeing things beyond the temporal. And every human argument that I mentioned that could have been on their mind is just temporal. Just human reasoning. Just looking at things for what we can see right now. I can't be of any assistance if I'm dead. So I'm going to bow, save my life, and now I can continue on in the cabinet of the king and be help to the Hebrew children. That's all human reasoning. That's all temporal thinking. That's all looking at things right now. They were looking at things eternally. God's going to deliver us out of your hands. Well, about the furnace, we're not so sure about that. But we won't bow. Verse 18, but if not, be it known unto thee, O king, we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Well, then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury. He's in a rage. Now he's out of control. And the form of his visage changed. Every child, they may not know what the old King's English means, but every child knows what that means. When you have gotten on Mom's or dad's last nerve. I mean the last, beyond the last, and their face changes. And you know, I'm in serious trouble. That's when the middle name comes out, the whole 9 yards. His visage changed. His face contorted. He was so angry that it changed his entire face. And again, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont or designed to be heated. 7 times hotter than it was intended to be heated. Now, here's an interesting little brain teaser. Why would he do that? If he wanted to torture them, turn it down and make them suffer. If it's 7 times hot, we're going to see that the people that threw them in perished. This was instant death. If you want to make them suffer, turn it down a little bit and make them suffer. Interesting little thought that I ran across in a commentary. And he commanded the most mighty men, his mightiest, most trusted, possibly his own bodyguards. These men that he trusted and they're mighty, that were in his army, to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them in the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, their hats, and all other garments, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The fire killed the soldiers that bound them and threw them in the furnace. That's hot. 7 times hotter than the furnace was designed to run. Then Nebuchadnezzar, and these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished. We would say astonished. And rose up in haste. Somehow from his vantage point, he could see in the furnace. I don't understand the design of the furnace necessarily. A lot of different supposition as to how the furnace would have been designed so that he could see in. But he could see in. And he rose up in haste. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar knew these men. I believe that on the main, he respected these men. He promoted them prior to this. And he will again, by the way. I don't think he felt ill of them as a general rule. And they had been, I'm confident, they had been loyal to him as a general rule. But he had painted himself into a corner, and he had nothing else that he could do about this. And he was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake, and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose. They're not bound. Walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. A lot of debate on whether or not that was actually a pre-incarnate manifestation of Christ or just an angel. I believe it was Christ. He had manifested himself in several other places in the Old Testament. No reason to believe that he couldn't and didn't here. At any rate, the form of the 4th was clearly not simply human. But all 4 of them, and it's mainly significant to the 3 that were bound, they're not any longer bound. They're walking around free in the furnace. Think of the freedom that walking through a trial gives you when you're walking through that trial with the Lord. Freedom from fear. I mean, it's symbolic and symbolized by their binding being burnt off of them. But they're in the midst of their trial. And they were bound and thrown into this trial. And now they're not bound. And they're walking freely. The Lord by their side. Can you imagine that conversation? Can you imagine fire so hot that the soldiers that threw them in perished? And they're just walking around. They're just like, hey, this is kind of cool. No pun intended. Fire, cool. Ah. They're like, wow. And and I think it's so symbolic that their bindings are loose. The freedom that they have walking through that trial, fiery trial in this case, as the Lord walks with them. Free from fear, free from failure, free from, as they're trusting the Lord, free from failure, free from backsliding, free from pain. And the fire could have, it didn't, but it could have caused them pain, and it could have taken their lives, and had the Lord been there with them, He could have comforted them through that. Those things are supposition, but what we do see is them free in this fire. 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and have no hurt. The same Lord is faithful today. The same Lord will, if you look to Him by faith and lean on Him by faith, He'll walk with you and me through the trial. And you can experience that strength. You can experience that freedom as we walk through trials, as we walk through valleys, as we walk through hard times. But you got to look to Him. You can't look at human reasoning, and you can't trust the flesh to come up with a way out of this. They just said, Neb, I don't know. The Lord can deliver us out of your furnace. And He's going to deliver us out of your hands. And that same Lord is on the throne today. And while He may not have to walk with us in a fiery furnace, there are plenty of trials in your life and plenty of valleys in your life that He can walk with you through. Look to Him in faith. Walk with Him by faith. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth. Now, by the way, Nebuchadnezzar's not converted. Nebuchadnezzar did not just pledge allegiance to the Most High God. I believe Nebuchadnezzar just said, your God's bigger than my God. Nebuchadnezzar is still, and when we get to chapter 4, then we can talk about his conversion. But Nebuchadnezzar is still a polytheistic individual. He has his many gods. He just now, hats off to yours, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Your God's bigger than mine. That's all he's saying here in my estimation. Servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. And the princes, the governors, the captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. Can you imagine? Most of us, hopefully it's not happened in your real inner circle, but most of us have been around somebody that's had a house fire. They call them fire. A lot of stores will have a fire sale. The garment looks fine, but you can't get the smell of smoke out of it. Or if you've had a house fire, and I've had friends that have, and they've had to throw every piece of clothing away. The fire, the smell of smoke, will not come out of the garment. And God, who is God over all things, not a hair of their head singed, their coats not changed, the smell of fire had not passed on them. The fire had no effect on them except to loose them from their bindings. It's the power of faith. The power of walking with the Lord by faith. The fire had no ill effect on them, only liberated them when they walked with the Lord. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that every people, nation, language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be, he loves this, cut into pieces and their houses made a dunghill. We've heard that before. Cut into pieces and your houses turned into a manure pile. Because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Now you gotta settle in on verse 30 and love this. Then the king promoted. They're already rulers in the province of Babylon. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Now, we've got to circle back to human reasoning. How easy would it have been? Think about it. I mean, be honest about it. Yeah, and how can you and I completely be honest about it? We've probably never been faced with anything near this. But how easy would it have been for them to say, if I don't bow, I die. Literally die, and die a terrible death in the fire. And if I don't bow, I die. And if I die, I can't help my people. I can't be a liaison for my people. The Lord has gone to great lengths to get me here in this position. And I'm here to be a help. I'm here to serve the king. I'm here to honor God. And in the process, I can help my people. And if I'm dead, I can't do that. And there's 1,000 ways you can reason your way into bowing. And the key one would be, what good am I dead? How can I help my people dead? They just got promoted. They can help their people even more. They're now in a stronger position. Not only as an office, their position is stronger because he's promoted them. But their position in the eyes of the king is stronger. Nobody's God can do what your God can do. And so all that human reasoning is out the window. And it is today as well. When you and I try to use human reasoning to get out of something God tells us to do. Or when you and I use human reasoning to try to do something God tells us not to do. It's just as faulty now as it was then. It's always the more beneficial path to honor God and His Word. It's always the more beneficial path to do what He says. It's always more beneficial, even if it costs us our life. Literally. Because it would be an honor to Him. And the Hebrews chapter 11, where we're spending our Sunday afternoons right now, is literally full of men and women that gave their lives for God, now listed in Hebrews chapter 11 for all eternity, as men and women whom the world was not worthy, of whom the world was not worthy. They died. They're unnamed people that died. Yeah. God knows every one of them. God was standing with every one of them as they gave their life for Him. May we be men and women of the book, strongly standing for "Thus saith the Lord." May we have the wisdom to know how to implement what the book says. In other words, where to draw the lines. You and I have to draw lines every day. And more, the generation younger than me is going to have to figure out where to draw more lines, because the government's getting more restrictive. The government's going to move in and tighten up the nooses, not nooses. The government's going to get and tighten up the restrictions on what people can do. This has been a great opportunity for them to try to move in. They're taking every opportunity they can. And we have to be wise to know where to draw the lines. Where does Romans 13 come into play, and we give honor to the government that God has put into place, and where does Acts come into play, where Peter says we ought to serve God rather than men? And we need to know where that line is. We need to know where to put that line in the sand, and that's a line I won't cross. Remember, we talked about the immeasurable effect of an uncompromising individual. We had originally talked about that with Daniel. The immeasurable the effect of his influence in the kingdom on Nebuchadnezzar. How much that effect or that influence would have been negatively affected had he compromised. How much would their influence have been negatively affected had they compromised? May God give us the strength to stand. I preached out of Daniel 3 many times. 3 men stood and changed a nation. I was in a nursing home one time. I had surrendered to preach, and Brother Jones hooked me up with a once-a-month preaching spot in the nursing home. I said Nebuchadnezzar had turned the furnace on and lit the fire. One little lady that was sitting right here, I thought was asleep, she heard fire. Fire! And she started screaming fire. People around her going, no, 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 no. She started taking her walker and slamming it on the floor and said, "Fire! Get me out of here! Fire!" And they had to get her out. They had to take her out of there. First time I ever preached, I think, out of Daniel chapter 3. Ran one lady off. May God give us the strength and courage and wisdom of these 4 found in the book of Daniel. And may we, with an uncompromising conviction to serve God, have an immeasurable influence on those around us. God's still God. And He's still calling upon men and women to serve Him faithfully. May that be us. Let's stand.